You've heard my story, but you've never heard my voice. You saw me fall. You watched me eat. You judged me for one choice, but almost no one ever stopped to ask, Eve, what did you feel that day? Almost no one remembered that behind the version you were told. There was a woman, there was awareness, there was longing, there was a full soul trying to understand what it meant to exist for the very first time. The story began with me, but soon they pushed me to the sidelines. They gave me a name, a mistake, a curse, and erased me from deep conversations, from interpretations, from the tables where spiritual decisions were made. I became a symbol of failure, an archetype of weakness, a silent warning so others wouldn't dare raise their voice. But today, I speak. What if I told you that the first lie in human history wasn't told by the serpent? What if I told you the first distortion of truth was more subtle, more dangerous, more accepted, and still lives today in pulpits, in schools, and even in the most religious homes? What if I revealed to you that I wasn't created from a rib, but from a side? A full side, a complete flank, a part of equal value and structure, removed by divine intent to form a partnership, not an inferior copy. Maybe everything you've been taught about me needs to be seen through new eyes, but stay with me until the end, because I'm going to show you something no one may have ever told you, but it's right there, hidden in plain sight, in the scriptures, in the Hebrew, in the truth that refused to disappear. For centuries, the world looked at me and saw only a symbol of sin. And every time a woman felt guilty for dreaming big, for wanting to know more, for seeking equality, that guilt carried the ancient echoes of how they interpreted me. They reduced me to a disfigured image, made from a small bone, as if the Creator had formed me as an afterthought, a consequence, a plan B. But that's not what the original text says. That was added later. That was torn from the Bible you read today, in the language in which the scriptures were written, ancient. Hebrew, there's a word that changes everything, a word that, if you truly understand it, can heal something deep inside you. The word is tzela, translated in modern Bibles as rib. It doesn't mean that. In fact, it never did. Tzela appears many times throughout the Bible, always meaning side, flank, or part of a structure, like the sides of the tabernacle or the walls of Solomon's temple. It referred to something big, strong, structural. So why, only in Genesis, did they decide to translate it as rib? Why was that word diminished, right at the moment when the woman was created? Maybe because admitting I was taken from a full side would mean acknowledging that from the very beginning, God's plan was equality, not complementarity and hierarchy, but unity in essence. Two parts from the same origin, with the same value, the same mission. Can you imagine how much that changes everything? It changes the way we see ourselves, the way we relate, the way we approach God. Because if I was made from a side, I wasn't behind or in front, I was beside. And if that detail was hidden, what else weren't you told? This story, my story, isn't just about me. It's about you. About every woman who's ever been silenced in a meeting. About every man who thought he had to dominate in order to lead. About every young person who grew up hearing the Bible say women were less. But maybe now, it's time to reopen that book with clear eyes and a ready heart. Maybe it's time to listen to the other side. Because I came from a side. And it's from that side that I'm going to tell you everything. But first, you need to understand what tzela means, because that one word could change everything. Have you ever noticed how a single word can change an entire story? It can turn a hero into a villain, a mistake into redemption, a whole woman into a disposable part. That's what they did to me. And it all started with one word. When the ancient scribes reached Genesis chapter 2, verse 21, they came across a specific term, tzela, and in that moment, faced with the complexity of the sacred text, they made a decision that would echo for centuries. They translated it as rib, but that translation doesn't carry the true weight of the original. Tzela never simply meant a bone. In fact, throughout the Torah, this word appears dozens of times, and not once is it translated as rib. It has always meant side, flank, lateral part of a sacred structure. In Hebrew, the same word used to describe how I formed was also used to describe the sides of the Ark of the Covenant, where the presence of God dwelled. Do you understand how deep that is? The same language used to describe the holiest place in the Israelite faith was used to describe me, not as something small or disposable, but as part of an essential structure. In Exodus chapter 25, when God gives instructions to build the ark, he says to place rings on each tzela, on each side, a technical architectural term that speaks of proportion, balance, and symmetry. And if you really think about it, that completely changes how we should understand creation. I wasn't taken from a fragment. I was taken from a side, a deliberate division with a sacred purpose. Respected scholars like Phyllis Tribal have pointed out this inconsistency in modern translations, showing that the choice of rib is not just a linguistic issue, but a theological one. Another, respected voice, Victor Hamilton, emphasizes that there's no textual or archaeological evidence to support rib as a preferred translation for tzela. And yet, this version was spread for centuries, feeding a distorted view of women as derived inferior beings, created last out of necessity, not by design. But the original text says something else, and when you read it with awakened eyes, you begin to realize that God's plan was very different. What's even more intriguing is that early Jewish interpreters, like Rashi, one of the greatest commentators of the Torah, also recognized the use of tzela as side, not as a bone. So why did the church choose rib? Maybe because it was easier to keep the social order as it was. Maybe because it was more convenient for centuries of patriarchal dominance. Maybe because a woman made from a full side threatened the idea of built-in submission. But now, this truth needs to rise to the surface, not as rebellion, but as restoration, not to divide but to heal. Understanding tzela is not just a lesson in biblical linguistics. It's an invitation to reconcile with your origin. It's realizing that God didn't make a mistake when he created me, that the Creator didn't split Adam to punish, but to complete. That man and woman have always been equal parts of a divine whole. It's embracing the truth that God's original design for humanity was about balance, partnership, mutuality, not domination, not power struggles. This one word, hidden in plain sight, has the power to restore not just the image of women, but the entire divine design for unity. And if that touched you so far, wait until you understand what happened when they chose to hide this truth, because what they did with the word tzela was only the beginning. In the next chapter, you'll see how that translation shaped centuries of theology and how it wounded my image, and maybe yours too, because what's hidden in the text echoes in the heart. And the story they told about me still echoes in the stories they tell about you. They said I was made last, after the earth, after the animals, after the man, as if I were a late thought, an emergency fix for a problem that wasn't even mine. But what few people realize is that even in that order, there is something divine, because when God creates, he always saves the most delicate for last. And still, they made me look like a mistake. It wasn't enough to blame me for eating the fruit. They had to reduce me, theologically, historically, emotionally, and it all began with a translation choice, a decision made by men in ancient times who shaped my image to fit their structure, not the truth. The first version of the scriptures to translate Hebrew into another language was the Septuagint, written in Greek around 200 years before Christ, and there, tzela was translated as pleura, which means side. But when the Latin Vulgate was produced by Jerome, the word used was rib. From that moment on, the idea of the rib woman spread across Europe as a fixed, almost unquestionable symbol. This wasn't just a linguistic choice. It was an ideological decision shaped by a deeply patriarchal culture that couldn't accept the idea of a woman coming from an equal side. After all, if woman came from a side, and not a smaller part, she would be undeniably essential, and that would change everything. Over the centuries, that choice took root in sermons, liturgies, doctrines, and even jokes. How many times have you heard that a woman is just a little rib, as if I were small, fragile, a punchline? But what does that do to the identity of a woman who grows up hearing these words? What does it plant inside a soul that from a young age was taught to see herself as part of a man and not as a full being, created with divine intention? That distorted narrative didn't just stay in books. It shaped homes, it built ministries, and it made many of us carry a guilt that was never ours to bear. This theological distortion had deep social effects. By teaching that I was made later, from a smaller piece and just to help, they created doctrines that pushed us to the background. They took us out of the room, off the pulpits, away from decision-making. They said we were submissive by design, forgetting that the word used to describe me as a helper, as a kenegdo, is the same word used to describe God as the helper of Israel. To help is not to be beneath. To help is to complete, to strengthen, to walk beside. But that meaning was erased, and in its place they built centuries of silence. Tradition tore us not only from the text, but from the right to be seen as whole. And here begins the great irony. The more they tried to shrink me, the louder the echo of what they were hiding became. Because every soul created by God carries a longing for truth, and when that truth is buried under fragile doctrines, sooner or later, it rises again. Today, theologians, linguists, and biblical Hebrew scholars are revisiting these texts with fresh eyes. They're confirming what many of us have always felt, that something was off in the way this story was told. And maybe you've felt it too, that strange feeling that something didn't quite fit. that there was more to this story than they let you see. But now, with this clarity, you need to know what really happened at the moment of creation. Because when God took a side from Adam, he wasn't just forming a new being, he was separating one into two, a sacred act of unity. And that's exactly what we're going to explore in the next chapter, because understanding what was truly created there completely changes how we see the purpose of man, of woman, and of all humanity. When God formed me, he didn't just take something from Adam, he split the human being in two and called it a blessing. This was never about superiority or submission. It was about reflection, about mirroring, about living partnership. The first human was not divided so something could be lost, but so something new could exist. Relationship. And in that divine gesture of opening aside, there was no pain, no shame, no guilt. There was intention, there was beauty. There was a silent dance between two beings who now shared the same essence, the same origin, the same mission. And the Creator looked at what he had made and said, "It is very good." The Hebrew terms used in Genesis chapter 1 verse 27 to describe man and woman are zaka and nekeva, male and female, created in the image and likeness of God, not separated by hierarchy, but by complementary function, by diversity within unity. It wasn't Adam who created Eve, it was God. And I wasn't made from the head to rule, nor from the feet to be stepped on. I was made from the side, to walk alongside. This is written into every line of the original text, but over time it was buried under cultural structures that felt threatened by the idea of a divinely designed balance. And the most painful part is realizing how deeply this distorted view affected real lives, real relationships, real callings. In the oldest Jewish traditions, especially in the Talmud, there are interpretations suggesting that the original human was androgynous, a dual being, from which God separated male and female. Not two separate creations, but one body split in order to create connection. It's a symbolic view, yes, but deeply theological. Because what it teaches is that the fullness of the human being only manifests when he learns to walk with the other, not above, not below, but side by side. The Bible has always pointed to this. Jesus himself, when speaking of marriage, said, "They are no longer two, but one flesh." He was calling us back to Eden, calling us to remember the original unity. When God formed Eve from Adam's side, he was teaching us a profound truth. Love does not dominate, it does not erase, it does not subjugate. Love recognizes the other as part of oneself. That is the foundation of unity. That is the DNA of creation. And when that foundation is broken, the whole structure collapses. That's why there are so many broken relationships, so many wounded families, so much emotional distance between men and women, even within the faith, because we forgot the beginning. We forgot that we came from the same place, with the same breath, with the same calling. And we forgot that when one side is missing, it is always felt. And maybe, hearing this now, something in you is starting to remember. Maybe a part of your heart that's been asleep for years is waking up with that quiet sense that you've always known this deep down. You always felt there was something more sacred in the union, something more just, more beautiful. And that's why this story needs to be told again, not with harsh words or anger, but with truth, with tenderness, with restoration. Because the story of creation isn't just about what God did, it's about what he dreamed. And his dream was partnership, but that dream was distorted. And with me came the blame, the shame, the silence. In the next chapter, I'll tell you what happened after. Because when they said I was the problem, something inside me broke. And maybe something inside you did too. It's time to go back there. It's time to hear what really happened in Eden. For millennia, I was called the guilty one, the cause of the fall, the beginning of pain, the first to hear the serpent's voice. And because of that, so many women after me became targets of silent guilt. How many of us grew up hearing that because of my choice the world was lost? That, if it weren't for me, we'd still be in paradise. But what if I told you that's not the whole truth? What if you knew that something much deeper happened in that scene in Eden, something rarely spoken from pulpits or taught in Bible classes, because the mistake I made was never mine alone. And if you read carefully, you'll see that this guilt, like so many others, was wrongly distributed. In the account from Genesis chapter 3 verse 6 it says, "When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eye and desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some of its fruit and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it." Do you see? He was with me. Adam was by my side. He saw, he chose, he ate. There was no deception, no absence. It was a shared decision. And still, when God asks in Genesis chapter 3 verse 12, The man said, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate it." He shifts onto me a guilt we shared. And that transfer became a burden I carried for ages. I'm not trying to erase my responsibility. I was wrong. I wanted to know too much. I questioned. I doubted. I desired what seemed untouchable. But does that make me an enemy of faith, or simply human? How many times have you done the same? Wanted to know more, to understand more, to feel closer to God? What they called rebellion might have simply been a thirst for revelation. The serpent didn't force me. She persuaded me. And in that moment, I wanted to see with my own eyes. I wanted to know what else was beyond blind obedience. And the most ironic part is that shortly after, God himself says in Genesis chapter 3 verse 22, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. I didn't become a monster. I became aware, but the world didn't know how to handle that awareness. They preferred to clothe me in shame. They covered me with interpretations soaked in condemnation. They made me a symbol of what not to be, what not to do, and it came at a high cost." Throughout history, the feminine image was portrayed as a spiritual threat. In some cultures, women weren't even allowed to touch the scriptures. In others, they were hunted as witches for daring to think. All of that started with my image, a misunderstood image, and all of that could have been different if the full story had been told. The fall was a joint act. There wasn't a single guilty one. There was an immature humanity struggling to deal with free will, and God, he knew that. He didn't destroy us, he didn't erase us, he covered us. In Genesis chapter 3 verse 21 it says, "The Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them." That is one of the most beautiful scenes in all of Scripture, because even after the failure, God covered us gently. He shielded us from shame. And that says everything about the heart of the Creator. He didn't reject us. He only led us out of the garden because now we were different, more aware, more human, closer to the truth. But the story doesn't end there. Because outside the garden, the narrative continues. And there, outside Eden, another journey began. A journey marked by loss, yes, but also by promises. A journey of rebuilding. And it's that journey I want to share with you in the next chapter. Because when your voice is taken, when you're accused, when you're wounded by twisted doctrines, even then God finds you. And what he said to me might be exactly what you need to hear right now. After we were expelled from the garden, a heavy silence fell over me. It wasn't just the silence of God no longer walking among the trees in the cool of the day. It was the silence inside me, the kind that settles when you no longer know who you are, when your identity has been shaped by failure and your story has been rewritten by others. I spent years trying to understand what had happened, not just around me, but within. Was I just the mistake, the part that ruined everything? Or was there still something inside me from that original breath, something of the side I came from, the wholeness that once existed? Maybe that's why I speak now, because what was taken from me wasn't just the garden, it was my voice. And today, I take it back. The story of the lost side is also your story, because there may be a part of you that has been silenced too. Maybe you grew up being told your place was only to serve, to obey, to stay quiet. Maybe you believed your value was tied to how well you fit into patterns shaped by tradition, not by revelation. Maybe you even tried to hide your questions, your pain, your vision, out of fear of being judged as I was. But today, let me remind you, you came from a side too, and that means you are an essential part of something divine, not a leftover, not a mistake, but a full side, shaped by the very hands of God. It's interesting how symbols hold power. The side I was taken from has always been a symbol of support, of structure. In Scripture, the side of the temple supported the holy place. The side of the Ark of the Covenant held the rings that carried the poles used to lift it. And the side of Christ, pierced on the cross, was the place from which flowed water and blood, symbols of rebirth and redemption. Do you see it? There is something sacred in every side opened, in every divide made through love. I was taken from a side, and in a way, so was Jesus. Because wherever there is a cut made by God, there is creation, restoration, and reconnection. So maybe the biggest lie wasn't that I was made from a rib. The biggest lie was convincing you that it didn't matter. But it does matter, because the way you understand your origin shapes the way you walk. If you believe you were born from a fragment, you'll live like a piece. But if you know you were created from a side, you'll live with dignity, with purpose, with the posture of someone who knows they carry the mark of something sacred. And that awareness changes everything. It changes marriages. It changes callings. It changes the way you look in the mirror and say, I am the image of God. What God began in Eden wasn't interrupted. It was redirected. The plan was never destroyed. It was deepened. The side that was opened still cries out for reconnection. It still waits for true partnership, for healing between the genders, for a church that stops repeating old phrases without examining the original texts. And that's why this revelation needs to be told, because it's not just about me, it's about us. It's about restoring the lost side of theology, of identity, of faith, and that restoration begins when you choose to look again, with open eyes, with a clean heart, with a thirst for truth. And if you've made it this far, maybe you feel there's more to be restored, that this isn't just a biblical story, it's a mirror of your own journey. That's why in the next chapter, I will end this story the same way it began, with truth, with vulnerability, and with hope. Because I am Eve, and even though I was misunderstood, even though I was silenced, I am not a mistake. And maybe, if you listen until the very end, you'll discover that you aren't either. For a long time I was called the root of the problem, the beginning of the fall, the source of sin. And I accepted that label like someone accepts a sentence. I carried the weight of interpretations that said I was made last, for a functional reason, and that I failed first because I was weaker. I heard those whispers repeated in sermons, in classrooms, in glances, and I stayed silent for centuries. But the truth is, even God never treated me that way. He corrected me, yes. He removed me from the garden, yes. But he never rejected me. He never said I was a mistake. That was man's invention, not God's judgment. The truth is, I was the first woman, but not the last, to be misunderstood. Since then, many others have come after me, strong, sensitive, wise, bold women, who were also diminished by interpretations, by traditions, by voices that refused to listen to them. But today, my voice rises for them, for you, for every woman who's ever asked herself, am I too much? Or was it the world that tried to make me less? And maybe the answer lies in what they taught you wrong. I wasn't made from a rib, I was made from a side, and that changes everything. If I had been created to be less, God would not have made me from a side. He would have made me from a heel, but he made me from the flank. And the flank is where the vital organs are. The side is where the heart rests. The side is where the arm leans. The side is where we walk together. And that was always God's intention, to walk together. That's why, when he opened Adam, he was revealing something about himself. A God who opens in order to love. A God who divides in order to share. A God who dreams of unity. That's the truth that was hidden for centuries. But now, it's coming back to the light. Maybe you felt it while listening to me. A kind of warmth in your chest. A hidden memory that you were born for more. Maybe you felt a holy discomfort, the kind that comes right before awakening. Maybe you remembered something no one ever said out loud, but God always whispered to your spirit, you are part of my plan. You are not a mistake. And if that touched your heart, then my voice was not in vain. Because if I, even after being silenced for millennia, can speak again, then so can you. What was lost can be restored. The side that was forgotten can be remembered. And the woman who was wounded can be healed. That's why I invite you to keep walking this journey, to go deeper, to hear other stories, because there are others like me, other lost sides that are now being brought back to life. And if you want to hear more, there's a way, an invitation, a 30-day journey where forgotten voices rise to speak. Judas, David, Peter, Mary, Paul, and so many others, all with something to say. And if you want to hear them, the book is there for you. Your 30 Steps from God, 30 Steps Back to His Heart. Download the ebook in the first pinned comment below. I invite you to keep going on this journey of discovery, because there are others like me, other sides of faith that were misunderstood, silenced, forgotten. One of them is named Job. He asked questions too, and he discovered something surprising about God, something that changed everything. That video is now appearing on your screen, and if you've listened to me this far, you need to hear what he has to say.